Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 28th of January of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first I would like to talk about Russia, about Moscow. We have a lot of very interesting statements. For example, Saudi Arabia and OPEC Plus members ignored Trump's call to lower oil prices to pressure Russia. Trump planned to collapse prices in order to encourage Russia to negotiate with Kyiv to end the war. Ministers of oil exporting countries that are members of OPEC Plus held a meeting, after which they said that OPEC does not plan to change their current plan, which involves increasing production from April, and the agenda of the meeting of countries scheduled on February 3 will not undergo changes. This is a very important statement because we see that Donald Trump, the President of the United States of America, has less and less sources, has less and less things that he can use to manipulate Russia and Putin before the beginning of the negotiation process. Another important statement came from Russia. Today, the head of the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation, Sergei Naryshkin, proposed that Russian Historical Society discuss the topic of rights to Ukrainian lands with the participation of other countries. It is planned to invite the three main states bordering Ukraine, namely Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia. Answering the question of whether the division of Ukrainian territory is possible in the future, the head of the intelligence service of Russian Federation, Naryshkin, said that the topic will be discussed from a historical point of view at a round table. We will try to invite historians from the other countries, from Poland, from Hungary, and from Slovakia. That was stated by Naryshkin. Of course, from the statement, from the words of the head of the Foreign Intelligence Service, Naryshkin, we see that it's just a peaceful conference where different countries like Russia, like Poland, like Slovakia, and like Hungary will try to discuss the future of Ukraine. And I'll remind you that when talking about Ukraine and when talking about the Western territories, according to different sources, everything that is located to the west of this black line, the different countries like Poland and Slovakia and Hungary have historical rights. And obviously, if the time comes and if there are going to be possibilities, in the future, of course, these countries will not be against any territorial, let's say, increase of their own states. Maybe Poland will refuse at the beginning if something like this happens, but obviously if the process, let's say, is inevitable, obviously Poland will join this situation as well. So this is another game from Kremlin, how to break the friendship of European countries, how to break the union of different European states, and most likely this plan is going to work. Another important thing that is coming from Ukraine is that France will send Mirage fighters to Ukraine in the first quarter of 2025. That was stated by the foreign minister, Jean-Noël Barrot. And this is very interesting because not just about Mirage that will be sent to the territory of Ukraine. I don't remember. There was several updates about the pilots that were trained, but we got more updates about pilots that were trained to use F-16s. Anyway, this is not the most important. The most important part of this statement is that France is trying to play more significant role in the European security. And telling the truth, when summarizing everything, we can say that when talking about the European Union, there are just several countries that can play a big role in the European Union military sphere. It's France, basically, Poland probably, and maybe Germany. But when talking about Germany, it's less from the military forces perspective, but more from industrial perspective. But let's wait and see, because France and Paris today made a statement not just about Ukraine, not just about Mirage. Today, France reported, and France has discussed with Denmark sending troops to Greenland in response to United States President Donald Trump's repeated threats to annex the Danish territory. French foreign minister said Barrot's comments came as Danish Prime Minister met was in the middle of a lightning tour of European capitals to drum up support from allies in dealing with Trump. So this is a very important thing because according to information we have, Denmark is planning to increase the budget, military budget, for 2.1 billion to strengthen its military presence in the Arctic region amid Trump's interest in controlling Greenland. Maybe this money will be allocated to buy additional weapon equipment from France, and maybe this is money for France to use its forces to support this territory and not allow the United States of America once again to annex this island. Very interesting things are happening right now between the Western countries, and telling the truth, when people from Russia see all these statements, all these insults between European countries and the United States of America, you need to understand one thing, that this is the best thing ever that the Russians could expect do these days, when Western countries, European countries are fighting to each other. Okay, now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first we're going to talk about the south, the nearest direction. When talking about the settlement of Velika Novoselovka during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything. As I see, the Western media, the Western journalists are in shock, still stay in shock, because the settlement was taken by the Russians, probably with a small record of the special military operation, because that battle was the fastest battle since the beginning of war in Ukraine, and the Russians managed to take under control one of the most powerful stronghold from 10 till 16 days, and obviously this can just shock. Anyway, the Russians are regrouping right now, most likely because we haven't received anything from the territory, from the Ukrainian side of the river of Mokry Yali. The Russians are regrouping, the Russians are synchronizing their watches. They try to understand what they can do next, how they can attack, and whether they're going to attack these days, because when talking about weather, the weather is completely unpredictable, and it's very difficult to understand whether it's time to begin offensive or not, because the sources are saying that the weather is going to break another record. The weather is going to be hot, anomaly hot in this area in January, up to 20 Celsius according to Celsius. So it's obviously something unpredictable since the beginning of ages. Most likely this region haven't seen such a temperatures and such a weather. Now let's move in the direction of Andreevka fortified area. When talking about this area, we have additional changes on the ground, and we have lots of things to talk about. The Russians, despite the fact that Ukrainians most likely managed to stabilize the situation in this area, continue their offensive operation, and according to information we have during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the south of the settlement and to reach the territory of the cemetery that is located to the southwestern part of the settlement of Dachne. At least this information was provided us by different pro-Russian sources. As for pro-Ukrainian sources, yes, they confirm that currently there is a progress of the armed forces of Russian Federation in this direction, but the Russians are still too far to the cemetery. Anyway, we should discuss both updates, obviously, because the battle for the settlement continues. There are very heavy clashes in this area, but anyway, we understand that the Russians are entering into the final stage of the battle for this settlement, and most likely during this or the next week the village would be captured by the Russians completely. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions in the territory of the settlements of Rozliv, in the territory of the settlement of Constantinople. The Russians were continue destroying Ukrainian logistic main supply roads. Obviously, there is a real full-scale offensive from the Russian side with the purpose to defeat the Ukrainians in this area, to maintain the lines, to shorten the line of combat contact, and just simply saying to cut this Andreevka fortified area pocket. We are talking about the territory between the rivers and between the river of Vovcha and the river of Sudzha Yali. The Russians need to shorten the lines. The forces that they can release after they shorten these territories can be used for further offensive operation in the direction of Bogatyr and Alexeyevka. By the way, some sources forces have already renamed this territory from Kurachovo direction or from the Andreevka fortified area direction. Now military experts call this territory as the Bogatyr direction under the name of the settlement that is located in the most western part, in the most western point of this Andreevka fortified area. So this is the settlement of Bogatyr. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Dnipro direction. As you can see, during the previous 24 hours, the map has been changed significantly. The Russians took under control a few more tree lines in the fortifications towards the road TO 515. This information was provided us by pro-Russian resources and by pro-Ukrainian sources. The progress is significant, as you can see, and most likely tomorrow the Russian forces will be able and will cut and cross this road physically, and then the offensive will continue further in the direction of the settlement of Alexeyevka. By taking under control this road, the Russians will be able to improve their logistics between Ukrainka, Yasenevo and Andreevka itself, and it's going to be a very difficult situation for the Ukrainians. When talking about this number of villages, the Russians, according to information we have, took under control up to 75% of Novandreevka. The Ukrainians controlled just the northwestern part, just several buildings on the western street of Vishneva Street. Furthermore, the sources reported that today the armed force of Russian Federation began assault operation in the direction of the settlement by the name of Sribne. Currently, we don't know for sure how exactly the Russians are attacking, but I believe that the Russians are trying to advance from two sides, from the southeast and from the northeast. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in Nadezhdinka. We have a lot of very interesting details from this area. I'll remind you that just yesterday, the pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of clashes, the armed force of Russian Federation managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Nadezhdinka. And based on this report, we have adjusted this map as a contested area. But today, on the 28th of January, we got geolocation published by the Russian side, and in this video we can see how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian units in the most southwestern part of the settlement. Currently, we don't know for sure whether the Ukrainians managed to counterattack and to restore control over the lost territories, or maybe the Russians haven't entered these territories since the beginning of the battle. So maybe those reports that were published by the Russian sources were just speculations and wishful thinkings. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction, where the Russians are attacking and the Ukrainians are trying to counterattack. When talking about the Russian sources and the Russian forces, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians indeed managed to enter the eastern and the southeastern part of the settlement of Udachne. We came to this conclusion based on the video that was published by the 115th Motor Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. In this video, the Ukrainians were FPV droning and attacking the Russians exactly in this point. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map once again in the most eastern part of the settlement. The Ukrainians from their side during the previous 2 days conducted several counterattacks from the city of Pokrovsk along TO 406 road, and as a result of those counterattacks, the Ukrainians most likely managed to restore control over the southeastern part of the settlement of Kotlina. Furthermore, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over this stronghold and over this stronghold as well. We came to this conclusion based on the video that was published by the 425th Separate Storm Assault Brigade Skala, a battalion Skala. In this video, we can see how the Ukrainians reached the village and they start attacking the Russian positions. The Ukrainians landed infantry in this area, and then the Ukrainians captured several positions. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map. Now we see that the Ukrainians most likely will try to improve their positions further in the western direction with the purpose to reach along TO 406 road to reach the railways. And if the Ukrainians are able to do this, then the Ukrainians will be able to cut the Russians that are currently located on the territory of the settlement of Kotlina, and the Russians might be caught in cauldron. We're not talking about thousands of Russians, but several hundreds can be caught in cauldron, and the most important, the Russians may lose their positions on the territory of the mine administration of Pokrovsk. This is very important stronghold, and the Russians most likely will do everything they can with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to restore and to cut the Russians to cauldron. But as for the end of the 28th of January, we see certain progress on the ground in Ukrainian favor. Now let's move further. As for the city of Pokrovsk, the situation is very critical in this area. The Russians established complete control over the settlement with the use of fiber optic drones. For example, in this video we can see how the Russians damaged and destroyed several Ukrainian vehicles and equipments that were abandoned all over the entire city. We see that Ukrainians currently don't have any solution how to bring all these drones down. The Russians see no barriers and no resistance from the Ukrainian side, especially from the electronic warfare equipment, and this situation of course leads to significant losses from the Ukrainian side. Furthermore, when talking about the current situation, the Ukrainians already start suffering huge problems with logistics, because it's already very difficult to use the railways between the settlement of Sergeyevka and the city of Pokrovsk, because the Russian artillery has already possibilities to attack these lines, and which leads to significant losses. Currently, the Ukrainians are using just one railways, just one road for supply and support that goes from the city of Pokrovsk in the northern directions towards the settlement of Rodinske. And currently, this settlement of Rodinske is something like a hub, something like a service center, something like evacuation center. So it's the heart of Pokrovsk defense operation, because the most important roads, the most important lines are going exactly through this city, through this small town. And the Russians figured this information out, and during the previous 24 hours they were focused significantly in this area. The Russians are saying that as a result of reconnaissance operation they managed to discover the positions of Ukrainian vehicles with munition, and as a result of Lancet strikes and maybe FPV drone strikes or maybe missile strikes, the Russians managed to destroy a huge convoy of Ukrainian vehicles. There were lots of explosions. The Ukrainians suffered significant losses. So now the Russians found the key value, key region for the Ukrainians defense operation, and most likely we are going to see a huge concentration of Russian fire exactly in this point. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Toretsk agglomeration. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians were trying to attack the Ukrainians from the settlement of New York in the western direction with the purpose to take under control the settlement of Sukhaya Balka. As for the previous 24 hours, mainly the Russians were concentrated their fire using FPV drones and artillery. In this video we can see lots of episodes of how the Russians were attacking FPV droning the Ukrainian positions. So this is something like a part of clearing operation. Most likely we should expect during the next 48 hours the ground operation from the Russian side. If the Russians are able to break through the Ukrainian defense belt to the west of New York and let's say to take under control Ukrainian positions in the settlements of Sukhaya, Balka and Valentinovka, this might be something like another cauldron for the armored forces of Ukraine that are currently located inside of the settlements of Pantelimoniivka and Alexandropol. I'll remind you that several days ago different mappers reported that the Russians began advancing in the direction of Kotlina from the southwest and from the southeast. If the Russians are able to finish both operations successfully, the southern operation, this one in the direction of Kotlina and operation in the direction of Sukhaya Balka, then the Ukrainians that are currently located in this pocket might be caught in cauldron, and anyway they will be forced to begin retreat operation with the purpose not to let's say be captured by the Russians and not to repeat the story of the 110th Brigade that took place with them on the territory of Velika Novosilovka. Now let's move further. As for the city of Toretsk itself, we continue receiving different weird updates. During the previous 48 hours we adjusted the map in this area at least 2 or 3 times. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 25th of January, and here we can see the last progress on the ground in Russian favor. As you can see, the Russians managed to improve their positions on the territory of the mine, and starting on the 26th, on the 27th and the 28th of January, the Ukrainians carried out several successful counterattacks, and as a result of those counter-offensive operations, the Ukrainians managed to take under control the northern part of Toretsk. The Ukrainians, so this is the situation. We discussed this offensive operation yesterday. In this video, we can see Ukrainian vehicles, tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, personnel carriers, and in this video, we can see that Ukrainians captured the building and captured lots of Russian soldiers. And by the end of the 28th of January, we see that the Ukrainians most likely managed to restore control over these facilities. In this video, we can see these facilities, for example, that were FPV droned by the Russians. So once again, this is the facilities I'm talking about, these circles, and these are the circles on the map. So these territories under complete Ukrainian control. And furthermore, the Ukrainians of the Lut Assault Battalion Brigade counterattacked the Russian forces in this area and captured several buildings as well. So the main purpose of these attacks is not to restore control over the entire Toretsk. Obviously, it's impossible. The Ukrainians understand this. But the main purpose for the Ukrainians is not to allow the Russians to announce the victory or in this battle. It's very important for the Ukrainians. They want to wait some time. They see that the Russians most likely will not announce any victory until they secure the entire territory, and the Ukrainians are just trying not to allow the Russians to do this. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the city of Chasiv Yar. We got a lot of very interesting updates from this area. Different pro-Russian sources reported that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to secure the forest completely between the central part of the city of Chasiv Yar and the micro district of Novy of Chasiv Yar. So these territories were taken by the Russians, as you can see. Furthermore, according to different pro-Russian resources, the Russians were forced to fall back from the northern part of Chasiv Yar. As for now, we are not going to adjust the map. We are going just to mark this area as a contested zone, because now we have some doubts whether there are presence of the Russian forces in this area. The pro-Russian sources reported that Ukrainians most likely counterattack and force the Russians to fall back. We don't have enough of proofs or anything like this to change the map, but obviously we will keep this information in our minds. Maybe the Russians retreated from this area due to configuration of these positions. It's like a small pocket, artillery pocket, best, a very good position for Ukrainian artillerymen to destroy Russian units there. So they just retreated towards their main positions, because at the beginning the Russians took under control the most northern part just with one purpose: to cut supply lines and to block the central part from the mainland. But when the Russians managed to establish control over the industrial zone, maybe they lost the necessity of controlling this territory. So we don't know for sure, but obviously there are still very heavy clashes. The Ukrainians understand that after the fall of Toretsk, after the fall of Chasiv Yar, most likely Konstantinovka would be another record in the special military operation in terms of timings the Russians are needed to take under control these territories. Now let's move further. As for the Sivas direction, as usually during the previous 24 hours, nothing happened. The Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions, and that's it. As for the Liman direction, after the Ukrainians were most likely defeated during the battle for this dense network of the fortifications, and most likely the Russians won the battle for initiative, the Russians moved their focus and transferred their focus further in the western direction and established complete control over the lines to the west and the southwest of Ivanovka. So we should expect that in the very near future, the first videos or geolocations or first reports will occur from the territory of the settlement of Zarychne and this one. Now let's move further. As for the northern Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours we received the most important update. We still haven't received any video that can confirm the Russian presence in the northern part or the video with the Russian flag. We haven't received anything, but both almost every single pro-Russian resource, reliable resource, reported that as a result of clashes the Russians secured the territory of Dvorichne completely. Furthermore, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation today confirmed this information as well. The Russians are saying that as a result of decisive actions, the group of forces west managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Dvorichne. Later we got through another report about the same situation. The Russian Minister of Defense, Andrei Belousov, congratulated command and personnel of the 25th Separate Guards Sevastopol Red Banner motorized rifle brigade, named for the Latvian riflemen, on successful combat mission during the Battle of Dvorichna. So very big post to congratulate Russian soldiers. Anyway, obviously this is very important victory for the Russians. I'm not sure that the Russians are going to advance further in the northwest and western direction or the south and immediately or tomorrow. Most likely now the Russians will be focused on maintaining the lines to connect several settlements in one foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river Voskol. There are at least several settlements like Zapadne, like Dvorechna, like Novomlinsk, like Fogolevka. First, the Russians will try to take all of them, and then we might see another breakthrough of the armored force of Russian Federation. This is very critical and a dangerous foothold on the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainians understand this obviously, but as for now, they can't do anything with this. The Russians, after they captured the settlement of Tikhe, intensified their activities in the Vovchansk direction. For the previous several days, we've been receiving lots of updates almost every single day from this area, and something tells me that the Russians may try to finish the battle for Volchansk in the very near future, because when talking about Dvorichna and Volchansk, so these two settlements, it's the same situation when talking about the city of Toretsk and the city of Chasiv Yar. When two cities are captured, the Russians can move further in the direction of Konstantinovka from two directions. And the same situation with the settlement of Vovchansk. As soon as Dvorechna was taken by the Russians, now the Russians can advance in the direction of the northwestern direction, and the same story we might see from the city of Volchansk in the southeastern direction, with the purpose to meet two armies somewhere in the middle, in the area of Veliki Burluk, or maybe somewhere in the vicinity of this territory, and most likely we are going to see this in the very near future. The Russians also need to maintain the lines and to push the line of combat contact as far as possible from the borders, and to encircle Kupiansk and to begin advancing in the direction of the settlements like Balakleya, Izyum, so to repeat the war trip that we used to see in 2022 at the beginning of the special military operation. And now let's discuss the situation in the Sudzha area. And during the previous 24 hours, the Russians intensified their activities. As you can see, during the previous day, we got a lot of icons from this area. There are several important things that I would like to point to your attention. First of all, the weather is becoming better, and now most likely both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians, will intensify their activities. And this is the first thing. The second thing that I would like to point to your attention is that starting on the 28th on January, on the second half of January, we began receiving videos of FPV drone attacks already from the territory of Ukraine. For example, in this video, we can see how the Ukrainians were trying to bring additional reinforcements and reserves from the territory of Sumy Oblast in the direction of the Darina, Nikolaeva, Darina, and the settlement of Sverdlikova, but the Ukrainian vehicles were already destroyed on the territory of Ukraine. This is very important because we see that the battle for Sudzha is coming to its phase when the main clashes are going to take place. I'm talking about FPV drone strikes and artillery strikes are going to take place not even on the territory of Sudzha, but already on the territory of Suma. And these are the first cases of what I'm trying to tell you. And this is very important because this is the first evidence that Ukrainians are losing their control and losing the things in this direction. Furthermore, several tanks that most likely managed to reach Sverdlikova from the Ukrainian territory were also destroyed as a result of Russian FPV drone strikes with the fiber optic drones. Also, we got lots of updates from the northern part during the previous 24 hours. Lots of pro-Russian independent sources reported that the Russians began assault operation in the direction of the settlement by the name of Martinovka and in the direction of the settlement by the name of Nikolaevka. As for now, we haven't received anything when talking about geolocations or map updates from different sources. The only thing we got is geolocation that confirm that the Russians indeed attacked this territory with FAB and FPV drones. Most likely something big is happening right now in this direction, because if Ukrainians lose Martinovka and these villages, then the Russians will have no more barriers, no more settlements to attack the Sudzha agglomeration. Furthermore, different pro-Russian sources reported that the armored forces of Russian Federation managed to improve their positions on the Ukrainian side of the river of Psol and to take under control another part of the forest between Plyokhova and the Guiva itself. So the Russians are advancing, and the situation here is the same as we saw the situation in the area of Dvorichna. First it was just a small foothold, and now we see that the Russians control up to 3 settlements here. And here we can see the same story. First it was just a small foothold between Guiva and Plyokhova. Now this is a very huge bridgehead that the Russians can use to attack further deep inside of the territory of the Sumy Oblast of the territory of Ukraine. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.